Excellent, excellent. Thanks, JD. Thanks for everybody's patience. We were just maneuvering around some technical difficulties, but we got them taken care of. I appreciate everybody taking the time to join in today to hear from Contigo about how we work with healthcare clients and put them in the best possible HIPAA posture. And it takes a little bit of effort from a variety of places, but before we get started and we kind of dive into it, I want to just do some proper introductions. So my name is Brian Fuller. I'm the CEO of Contigo Technology. And with me today is JD Thompson, who is our compliancy manager. And Contigo is we grew up, for those of y'all who don't know us, we are a IT support firm. But as IT support firms mature and progress, our direction in our life cycle has taken us into an IT support firm, with very strong cybersecurity posture, and then one where we look at the road ahead for us, and we definitely see where compliancy is a very important and wedded value point that gets embedded into our IT support service. And as a IT support firm that's focused on compliancy, we really align with two major compliancy initiatives. One is HIPAA, which we'll be talking about today, and how we work with our healthcare clients and the conversations we have with them that go above and beyond just being an IT support firm. And the other one is something that has equally a crazy acronym, and it's called CMMC, and that is a government regulatory requirement for anybody who wants to sell upstream into the DoD ecosystems. We are very focused on those two regulatory endeavors. So today we're going to focus on HIPAA. And JD has sometimes JD, as our HIPAA compliancy expert, he will come in afterward providing IT support services for a healthcare organization. Sometimes he merely comes in and does a full end-to-end HIPAA risk assessment. And what spills out of that sometimes is the need to have a better cybersecurity policy where Contigo comes in and provides some additional IT support services to help ferment that HIPAA posture the client wants to be in. There's a couple different ways to get into it, but I think at the end of the day, it's all the same. HIPAA is a law, and it's wide and its requirements, and we feel like as where most of the larger healthcare organizations can find challenging, because what they're actually good is the administrative safeguards. But where it gets really hard sometimes is do we have the right cybersecurity posture? And we felt like Contigo, it was easier for us to come into the HIPAA arena, the compliancy arena, with deep, vast knowledge of the IT infrastructure and work out that way to help our clients get a full, well-rounded posture. And so that's kind of who we are. We're an IT support company with very deep compliancy expertise, and JD leads the charge for Contigo on that HIPAA regulatory requirements. So before we get started, just to let you know a little bit about the clients that we manage. So a lot of our clients in the healthcare arena, it's a wide variety, 52 cards in that deck. We have traditional hospitals, we have MRI centers, we have elective surgery centers. We have healthcare clients that make widgets. We have healthcare clients who are in the process of trying to get something approved by the FDA. Dentist offices. We see a big mix of the healthcare clients, and they all. You look at HIPAA through, a different type of lens. And one thing that JD does is he looks at, he's been sent to training, and he's been in the trenches for a while, and he sees things, as black and white. And so today he's going to talk through what being in a good HIPAA posture means and how to get there. And then we can ask some questions at the end. So JD Thompson, JD, you weren't supposed to wear your blue suit today. I was email out. I wear blue.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, so we wanted to take a moment and present this webinar basically on the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Not so much on what it is, because most healthcare organizations already know what that is, but more specifically the security rule and how there's often things that are overlooked that everyone should be paying attention to. So as Brian said, my name is JD Thompson. I am the compliance manager here at Contigo Technology. I am an OSEG certified governance, risk and compliance certified professional, and a certified HIPAA privacy and security expert. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I want to spend some time and just explain the difference between privacy and security. We all know the privacy rule and the security rule and what they entail of the HIPAA in its entirety. But for privacy, it focuses on the rights of the individual and their ability to control their protected health information. A lot of that is going to be where that's going to be put. How do I get a hold of it as a patient? How do I know you're not going to use that information? Either selling it or against me or however that might be. And then the security side of it is focusing on the protection of that electronic protected health information, or EPHI. So in privacy, it allows practices to use that information for things like treatment and payment and other required functions, but otherwise it has to remain confidential. So this is an assurance that the information will be safeguarded from an unauthorized disclosure. The privacy rule in general covers the physical security and confidentiality of PHI in all formats, including the electronic, but also the paper and the oral format. But the security rule, however, is basically healthcare organizations are required to implement adequate physical, technical, and administrative safeguards that protect patient EPHI. Just a few examples of that would be lock-in keys, alarm systems, passwords, access controls, things of that nature. And so the security rule specifically establishes national standards to protect those individuals' electronic personal health information, or EPHI again, and I'll probably just keep referring to that from now on as EPHI. But that is created, received, used, or maintained by a covered entity. So a covered entity is going to be any kind of healthcare organization that receives patient data, stores it, transmits it, or receives it. So the security rule requires appropriate, again, administrative, physical, and technical safeguards, which we'll get into in a little bit later, but that ensures the confidentiality, integrity, and security of that EPHI. So specifically, it's located at 45 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 160, and subparts A and C of Parts 164. So it's divided into sections, each representing a set of standards and implementation specifics that must be addressed by all covered entities. So I want throughout this webinar to keep in mind that the security rule is designated to be flexible and scalable. So what's appropriate for one practice might not be adequate for another. But however, what's not flexible is the requirement to implement all three types of safeguards. And again, all covered entities must comply with the applicable standards, the implementation specifics, and the requirements of the security rule with respect to EPHI. Each covered entity has that unique business and technical environment that they run their business, and that can contain challenges related to compliance within the security rule and the required safeguards for them individually. And that is part of the problem of just HIPAA compliance in general. There's a lot of these safeguards that we're going to talk about, and what works for one might not be necessarily okay for another, depending on what's being done and the size of the organization, things like that. So the safeguards, a lot of these safeguards, again, as I stated before, are known, and some of them aren't known as much as others. So there's 156 total safeguards. There's 73 administrative that really deals with administrative operations and policies. Excuse me. There's 38 physical, which is going to be the physical facility itself, and then 45 technical. So these these safeguards are really what keep healthcare organizations in compliance, and most of them revolve around technology and the processes of that technology. So even if For instance, the 73 administrative ones, even though it's classified as administrative, a lot of them touch on specific the specific technology being used or what needs to be implemented, or have policies and procedures thereof. So basically, for all of these safeguards, you have it's either required or it's addressable. As a required implementation, the specification is similar to a standard in that a covered entity must comply with it. So, for example, all covered entities must provide a risk assessment in accordance to 164.308A1 of the security rule. There is no way around this. There's no way to mitigate it with something else. This is a required safeguard that has to be implemented. And most organizations know this. They usually go with a 6-month to an annual assessment. The interesting,
Hey, JD, I do have a question for you on that, because I've a lot of these organizations for a while, they've been doing self-assessments, and some of them do, third-party assessments.
sure.
Are both acceptable? Are there requirements to have one or the other at some point in the life cycle of the organization? Can you just expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So they are both acceptable. The issue of doing an internal risk assessment from a third party standpoint is, again, the specific safeguards that are required and are addressable. We'll get into the details a little bit, but you have to have a way to back that up. How do I know specifically for an organization that I am doing the correct thing? How do I know that an alternative source is acceptable in each case without having that subject material expert kind of tell you or help explain or guide you through that process? So a lot of organizations like doing an internal one, maybe 1 year, and then the following year, outsourcing it to make sure that it's done appropriately. Again, some of those clients we have do 6 months, and then the next 6 months it's bringing us in and doing an overall scope of our knowledge and our expertise. But yes, to answer your question, both are acceptable. So moving forward with the addressable implementation specifics, covered entities must perform an assessment to determine whether the specification is reasonable and appropriate safeguard in that environment. Again, Brian, going back to that question, how do I know as someone who is in management at a certain healthcare organization, how do I know that the assessment and the specifications are reasonable and appropriate? So while performing the assessment, a covered entity must decide if it will implement the addressable implementation specifications, implement an equivalent alternative measure that allows compliance. Again, keywords there, allows compliance. Or thirdly, do not implement the addressable specification or any alternative measures, only if the measures taken are not reasonable and appropriate within its environment. Again, going back to right back to your question on these technical questions that are technical safeguards. Someone who's not in the IT field, how are you supposed to show the Department of Health and Human Services that yes, this is a reason we chose not to do this based on no expertise from a technology standpoint? And so
isn't that funny, just to kind of seize on what you said? I mean, we've been on the receiving end of an audit for a healthcare client, right? More than once. And even it's not, I think you're making the point that can hold water in two different ways. One is, if you have an internal resource doing a HIPAA internal risk assessment on, let's say you have a hospital of 200 employees, and you're going through, you may be very knowledgeable of the administrative safeguard and the physical safeguards, but the technical safeguards, they're tough, right? And so or you could be like an outside auditing company who specializes in HIPAA risk assessments, and they come in and they'll hand off technical questions to your MSP, and these questions, what we saw from these outside auditors, they would be years old. They were referencing technology that was already by the wayside, and not really acknowledging the fact that this hospital could be an all Office 365 or all G Suite, and everything's up in the cloud. And so it left an uneasy feeling about presenting the proper answer on behalf of the client to this assessor who may not be up on the technical knowledge of the day. So to your point, an outside auditing company that could come in and have the technical acumen along with all of the other pieces of the puzzle required for acknowledging what the HIPAA posture is very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more in a few minutes. But to kind of give you an example, because a lot of times clients are asking, okay, what's required? What's the difference between required and addressable? Is addressable optional? And I want to state it that addressable does not mean optional. Think of it as if there's a requirement that can't be implemented because it's not in the environment. So let's say this is kind of a silly example, but let's say your environment has no computers whatsoever. Well, then how would you implement encryption if you have no computers to encrypt? So again, that's a very silly example because most, if not all, covered entities today use computers. But it basically helps you understand the basic of what would be recorded on the assessment as addressable, not implemented. So moving forward, I want to give a few examples of each type of safeguard just to kind of give a roadmap of where this is going. So for the administrative safeguards, again, there's 73 total. And one, or for the first example, 164 through A1I, does your practice develop, document, and implement policies and procedures for assessing and managing risk to its electronic protected health information? It's a very basic question, but when you boil it down, have you identified the EPHI within the environment, within the organization? This can include EPHI that the organization creates, receives, maintains, or transmits. So this could be located on computers, workstations, servers, and even possibly email, depending on the environment. And so in that regard, what policies and procedures are in place regarding the handling of EPHI? So that's the first example. Second example, does your practice have policies and implement procedures to ensure it obtains business associate agreements? If you are a covered entity and don't know what business associate agreements are, please reach out because that is obviously a major category for all of this. And so a business associate is someone who basically helps a covered entity fulfill their job. Either they take part in holding some of that EPHI, maybe it's an application that's used to house it, to store it, or even to transmit it, whatever it might be, that is a business associate. And so do you have contracts in place with those outside entities entrusted with the EPHI within the organization? And then if so, how does that organization provide assurances that the EPHI is being protected in their environment? This is one of the issues that we see with most of our clients is they have, maybe they have business associate agreements in place and perhaps they don't, but the bigger issue is they are not receiving, there's no highway of communication between the two saying, this is how specifically we are keeping your EPHI safe in our environment. So again, this is for all business associates, including outsourced IT support services. So if another organization has access to the systems that create, receive, maintain, or transmit that EPHI of the covered entity, well, then they have to provide assurances that they're keeping their environment safe. And again, how do they do that? Well, they do that by following the same HIPAA security rule that the covered entities have.
One of the things you didn't put on there, JD, is it seems as though every time we get involved with a client, there is a renewed emphasis that they put on writing policies and procedures, right? I mean, because you can't, at a certain place, just like anything in technology, you have to train the users to have the correct behavior to protect the liability of the company. So can you kind of talk about that, kind of what you typically see as gaps when you're working with these healthcare clients? Do they have policies in place? And what are the policies that you recommend having? If you could name them off the top of your head. I know that I've seen them before.
Sure. So yeah, that is a big gap. Again, you can build different policies. You can have written information security policy. But to answer the first part of the question, this is an area that most organizations struggle with. They have either some sort of training down, they have some sort of employee handbook, maybe a code of conduct, things of that nature. But when you get down into, the granularity of what each policy has to have in it, well, that's where the organization is missing. So from a generalized aspect, they might have the business policies down, but as far as the HIPAA policies is where it fades. And to name a few, again, your written information security plan or policy, excuse me, sanction policy, access control policy, bring your own device policy. That's if someone wants to take their personally owned computer and use it for work purposes. Things of that nature, again, software policies. I'm not going to be able to remember them all off the
Sure,
top of
but
my head.
what we've done and I'm showing a little bit of our hand here, but we know what the policies are that need to be addressed, and for all of our healthcare clients, we'll introduce these 15 to 20 policies in like 90% completion, and just help our clients along at addressing this stuff. But not only writing them, but also making sure that annually their users are reviewing them and accepting them, which is the other big key. Because I was talking to one of our larger healthcare clients, and I told him, I said, it's so interesting to see the posture a dental office will have on HIPAA versus a hospital of your size with HIPAA. And he's like, Brian, it's not the HIPAA fine that makes us nervous. It's the civil lawsuits that make us nervous. And if we don't have a good HIPAA posture, we become much more liable for those civil lawsuits. So, the bigger you get, obviously, the more of a concern you have on this. But going back to it, writing policies and putting methodologies in place from a technology perspective to make sure all new employees see these, they accept them, and that you always are tracking this, and it's not a manual process. And that's other pieces of the tools that Contigo brings in for our healthcare clients.
Absolutely. So moving forward with the physical safeguards, again, there's 38 total. For instance, again, I'll give you just a few examples. Do you have an inventory of the physical systems, devices, and media in your office space that are used to store or contain EPHI? Again, this is under the physical safeguard, but as you can see, this is still touching on the technology aspect of the covered entity as a total. So no organization will know where to start implementing these safeguards without first starting with what is everything that they need to protect. Is there a running list of devices and systems, basically who has access to them and what they are necessary for? Again, I want to use the word running list because the environment is always changing for most businesses, and especially in the healthcare industry. Anytime somebody leaves or a computer breaks, does the inventory list reflect the current environment for that organization? This is another area that we see our clients struggle with, of just keeping up to the day-to-day personnel changes and the technology changes that come with that. And then as a second example, have you developed policies and procedures that plan for your workforce and your information technology service provider or contracted information technology support to gain access to your facility and EPHI during a disaster? So again, this touches on one of those policies that are required, and that's going to be your disaster recovery. Is there a plan that's set in place? Is there procedures that your employees not only know, but they're trained on and they've been tested on to make sure that when a disaster happens or an incident happens, how to report it, how to respond to it, how to mitigate it, and the following steps. So this is a requirement, and a much needed one at that, as we've seen in recent news with different ransomware and things hitting certain companies, but healthcare is not excluded from that list. So does the organization know what to do during an emergency? This could be anything from, again, power outages to floodings to ransomware to fake phishing email somebody clicks on. Anything that keeps employees from getting to the physical facility or interrupting the flow of data on the software. So for the technical safeguards, again, this is where it really kind of all meshes together. We have 45 total. And I'll give you, again, a few examples of these. So first one, does your practice implement the information system security protection tools to protect against malware. We all know about antivirus and anti-malware software, but is it applied on all systems? That's a great question that a lot of our clients come to us. And when we do, I'll touch on a little bit later, we do computer audits in an inventory list, we see just how off these numbers really are of, yes, I have antivirus installed on each laptop and it's working. Well, then we get into the discovery phase and we find out that actually, there's actually a good amount of computers that either the antivirus is not on there or it's not working, it's not running properly. And so, is it applied on all systems? But I want to point out that this also includes those systems used by business associates, which is another issue that we've ran into. Again, a business associate is helping that covered entity basically do the job that they need to do. And if the business associate is using information systems that houses or stores or sends, transmits, receives any of that EPHI, do they also have the protection tools to protect against malware? This is the first line of defense from bad actors looking to exploit systems. But antivirus alone is not the only best practice for keeping a system safe and secure. Other technical safeguards need to be put in place. And that's where, again, some of our clients are saying, oh, technical safeguards, I have antivirus, what else do I need? And so there's a lot of missing safeguards from most HIPAA postures for these type of healthcare clients. And so the second example, does your practice have audit control mechanisms that can monitor, record, and or examine information system activity? This is one, if not the most overlooked safeguards in the entirety of HIPAA security rule that I and Contigo has come across, and that is audit logs. So to put it plainly, an audit log is essentially a record of events and changes within the IT devices across the network. Basically, each device will create a log based on events. These audit logs are records of these specific event logs, so typically regarding a sequence of activities or a specific activity. They don't always operate in the same way, and interestingly enough, they actually vary quite significantly between devices, applications, and operating systems. But typically, they capture the events recorded, who performed an activity, what activity was performed, and how the system responded. So really that boils down to an organization needs to be able to pull logs from the computers that show who was logged in and when, what did they do while they were on the computer, and any other important identifiers for specific applications used for the process of, again, creating, receiving, maintaining, or transmitting EPHI.
Danny, I'll just add to that. So as we were starting earlier, I was talking about how we focus on two different regulatory requirements. The common denominator on the technical side of those regulatory requirements, the common denominator of the technical requirements that for us, for whether you're an IT person on staff, you're an MSP, is how to address this audit log language that sits in almost every regulatory requirement out there. Because a small business, I mean, could you imagine, you have 200 PCs, you have 20 servers, you got firewalls, you've got cloud services, and this regulatory requirement is asking you to document everything that's asked of all of those IT resources every day. I mean, and wherever you put the data, it's very difficult nut to crack. And it is something that Contigo does for our clients, and we've been able to achieve it, but it wasn't without a tremendous amount of trial and effort. And I'm happy to say that that's a very good example, and one of them that makes it so risky. But we had one client who was actually got audited after a audit log, an alert of some sort was recognized, and the audit logs were required as a part of the remediation, and there were no audit logs, and it only made the audit of that particular event for the client that much more messy. And they just got caught in the crosshairs of a very challenging regulatory requirement. But it's more and more doable these days. And if you're out there and you're like scratching your head how to do it, let us know, and we can talk to you through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this really goes back to our point at the beginning. When a company says, "Can I just do an assessment internally. These are the type of questions that, without that technology experience, you're just not going to be able to answer to the full amount that's necessary. And as you touched on, yes, this is a very important factor in incident response. Once an incident happens, typically the first thing people will go to are the audit logs, basically showing you specifically this is how somebody got in. This is who was logged in at this point and this time, the application that was brought up to use the incident, things like that. So Contigo, and us as a managed service provider to many healthcare organizations, again, as Brian was talking about, hospitals, we have some dental surgery providers, and many other practices. We kept receiving those IT questionnaires from our clients asking us what we do specifically for their environment. So we decided to launch an entire compliance department a few years ago that would be a proactive approach in helping organizations accomplish the required implementations of the security rule. Instead of us being on the tail end of, hey, I'm in an audit, which we've seen, or hey, I'm going to be audited soon. I need all these questions answered. What we decided to do is take a proactive approach to that. And so in doing so, we created our security risk assessment for our healthcare providers and our business associates. So what that is as you can see on the screen, Contigo's SRA approach. Our security risk assessment is an annual risk assessment, is required, which, as we've seen, includes many of the technical questions. So it just plays hand in hand with that. So it covers all 156 safeguards. Again, not just the administrative, not just the physical, and not just the technical, but every single safeguard that is included. It's a 3 to 4 week engagement covering all sites and locations. Depending on size, what we've seen is, some healthcare organizations have multiple locations. So when we do a security risk assessment, we don't just go to the main office and say, oh, this is what the main office is doing. We're going to write it in a way that looks like all of the locations are doing it. We have it listed out by site and by location. And part of that is, again, an inventory of devices. So we'll do a computer inventory list. We'll go through each employee, each device that is at that said location. We're looking at very specific things that, again, are all required safeguards that need to be implemented. So at the end of this 3 to 4 week engagement, we write up a full 10-section report, including what we observed, what needs to be implemented, and a complete remediation for each observation. And this really gives the organization a baseline for their HIPAA compliance, which is just not just a benefit, but also from a risk side, just a great asset to have. So again, if you come in and knowing there's 156 safeguards, you get a security risk assessment done, you see, oh wow, we're actually doing 108 of them. We still need the remaining safeguards implemented. And then what's nice about this is, again, as Contigo is an MSP, this is really where our expertise lies. So we can mesh the IT with the compliance. Imagine getting your car inspected because of an issue and the inspector says, well, here's all the things that need to be fixed, but good luck, and then sends you off on your own to kind of find different places that do different fixes. It's a much better decision to go to someone who's going to say, here's all the issues and here's how we help. So again, that's a big importance for us as an MSP, knowing that side of compliance, but also being able to assist in the remediations that are caused from maybe some of these gaps that our clients see. So on top of that, again, as I was talking about earlier, outsourced IT to a covered entity also under Texas House Bill 300 is classified as a covered entity. So we ourselves can't just do some of these safeguards. We have to have all of these safeguards done. So these are our Contigo's HIPAA assurances. All security products that we use were chosen because they complete a required safeguard of the HIPAA security rule and have business associate agreements in place. So again, what that means is for each safeguard that is required, that we need a security product to basically protect the environment, we reach out to the teams of those products and make sure that we have a business associate agreement in place with them, verifying that the systems that we use that are going to be accessing the systems of a covered entity and are giving those assurances that they're keeping it safe and secure which, again, is super, super important. Secondly, all of our employees are HIPAA trained, just like a covered entity. So it's not just oh, welcome to Contigo, here's the technical, type of new hire training. It also entails HIPAA training. On top of that, we have biweekly HIPAA symposiums for all our technicians. So what we do is we take a very specific part of the security rule and we'll play it out into our environment and how we play that into the client's environment. So our technicians know specifically, oh, that's right. Last month we talked about, X, Y, or Z. I need to make sure that I'm following these procedures for our healthcare clients. And then on top of that, it's specific training on handling and accessing clients' EPHI. All of our technicians know what EPHI is, typically where it's stored on clients' environments. If they come across it inadvertently, what they're supposed to do, how we handle that. And all of those things, both of those things, are baked into the policies that we have written in accordance to the security rule and the responsibilities we have as IT support. So this really, again, just shows the entirety of the HIPAA security rule, some of the safeguards that aren't necessarily talked about a whole lot, and how Contigo as an MSP accomplishes that as a business associate and also through the risk assessment process.
Excellent, JD. That's excellent. I appreciate you going into it. I would just say what I've noticed in our clients that come to us. Everybody is doing the best they can. It looks like at the 50-foot view. But if you really are the kind of organization that is going to begin taking it seriously, the first question you're going to get asked under a point of duress is, where is your last risk assessment? And if you do not have a formidable risk assessment, and whether it's the fifth one, but more importantly, it's the first one that you establish as your baseline, where you identify the gaps, and then you put your POAMs together to start building and filling in the gaps. That's kind of where the audits are going to start. So if you don't have one of those, you're not doing them manually, I would encourage you to do so, because that's step number one. And the second thing is what a company like us has really pulled together is the clients that we do it for, they have a hard time managing all of this stuff. It's some process, some policies over here, some administrative access control information's over here. And what Contigo does in not just guiding clients into a very strong HIPAA posture but also managing the data that's necessary to address questions. And so we use a cloud-based solution, and we do our audits, and we identify the gaps, and then we assign tickets to how to address those gaps. And it's a continual maturity process that's manageable, as opposed to just a snapshot in time. And then when push comes to shove, I got to go find all this stuff. That's kind of also where we can help. So we went over a little bit. If there's any questions, why don't we do just email them to you can send them to fuller@contigotx or jd.thompson@contigotx. And just reach out to us if you have any questions whatsoever. And maybe the easiest way to remember is that info@contigotx.com is the easiest way to get a hold of us. And we can answer any questions and consult with you on anything that's HIPAA related. So we appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you down the road. Thanks, everybody.